Hello and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm returning to the world of fighting fantasy game books. This was a series of choose your own adventures that were published by Penguin between 1982 and 1995, and which I loved when I was a young teenager and I used to collect. They used to have these distinctive green spines, and there were 59 of them produced in the original series. And you can read about the history of them in this rather wonderful large format book called You Are the Hero, written by Jonathan Green, and it features all the cover illustrations of the books and some of the illustrations inside. It goes through each of the books in detail. If you like fighting fantasy, it's well worth getting hold of this book. I really recommend it. Now, most of this book is devoted to the original series, which, as I said, ran till 1995. But then, in 2002, Fighting Fantasy was brought back by Wizard Books, and then later by Scholastic Books, and they reprinted some of the old classics like City of Thieves and Citadel of Chaos and Forest of Doom. But occasionally, they produced their own original adventures. There have been 12 of them since 2002 when the series was brought back. And what I wanted to do today was review each of those 12 books. Are they worth it? Are they up to the standard of the original series? Let's see. The first was Eye of the Dragon by one of the creators of the Fighting Fantasy series, Ian Livingstone. Now, this book is almost like Ian Livingstone sort of rebooting the series because it's as typical a fighting fantasy adventure as you could possibly have. It's just trying to find an emerald, a piece of treasure, in a dungeon. That's it. There's nothing especially memorable or remarkable or different about it. It is a bog standard fighting fantasy adventure. On those terms, it's fine. And if you want somewhere to start in fighting fantasy, this is actually a very good book to start because it's about as typical as you could possibly get. It's quite entertaining. You have a very irritating dwarf that you have to be mates with. Ian Livingstone always has sort of mates that turn up and accompany you through the adventures. The setup of the book is rather silly. You're staying in this inn. This bloke turns up and says, "Hey mate, I know about this treasure, right? You go and get that treasure and we'll share it. But in the meantime, can you drink this poison and you'll be dead in 14 days unless you come back?" And you drink the poison. Crazy. So it's a bit silly. But if you want a basic adventure and a place to start, this is great. If you're a dyed-in-the-wool fighting fantasy fan already, not much to it. The second book was Blood Bones. Now, this is written by Jonathan Green. Now, Jonathan Green, who wrote that big history book, almost single-handedly kept fighting fantasy going through the late 90s, early 2000s. He writes like a fan, right? And he's always putting in references to popular culture and books and, films that he likes. And I've always thought, as a fighting fantasy writer, he's a much better writer than he is a game constructor. I think his books are very pleasurable to read. They're very atmospheric and very well written. But sometimes the gameplay is a bit straightforward. I think that's true of Blood Bones. The first thing to say about Blood Bones is look at that magnificent cover. One of my favourite covers in the whole range. This wonderful, ghostly pirate king coming out of a green mist. Shades of John Carpenter's The Fog, really. The whole book is full of every pirate cliche you can think of. You even at one point have to go on board a ghost ship and liberate this crew of ghosts. It's like a cross between John Carpenter's The Fog and Pirates of the Caribbean. It's fun. I wouldn't say it's one of the most memorable adventures, but it does have a great cover. The third in the series, the new ones, is also by Jonathan Green, and this is Howl of the Werewolf. Now, I would say, of all the books that have been produced since 2002, the new ones, this is the fullest and most enjoyable and well-rounded adventure. It's very well written by Jonathan Green. It's pure horror stuff. And it's got a very good idea. It goes back to Creature of Havoc in the original series, where you were this beast. In this one, you've been bitten by a wolf, and you're slowly turning into a werewolf. And you've got to defeat the evil baddie, as well as not turning into a werewolf. It's a great idea. And Jonathan Green really, obviously loves the story. It's very atmospheric. It's very full of purple prose, with great illustrations. I think by Martin McKenna. He also did the illustrations for Eye of the Dragon, very good. So it's great fun. It has every horror cliche in the book. Even Frankenstein turns up at some point. There's vampires. There's a Van Helsing-like character. I mean, every horror cliche is gone through with glee. It's a very full adventure. It's large. It's well over 400 paragraphs. Lots going on. Lots of different enemies. Lots of different locations. It's a lot of fun. So if you haven't tried some of the newer ones since the original series, this is a very, very good one to start with. Highly recommended. Jonathan Green's next one, I think this one went under the radar a bit, Stormslayer. Actually, I find this story quite enjoyable. Again, it's got shades of Creature of Havoc. I think Jonathan Green was very influenced by Creature of Havoc because the monster, well, the enemy, is this weather mage who lives in a giant brass fish that floats through the clouds, causing storms everywhere in Valencia. There was a sort of similar floating enemy in Creature of Havoc, I remember. As always with Jonathan Green, I think the writing is better than the gameplay. I found the gameplay in this a bit odd. There's one point where you're fighting this earth elemental. Your mate turns up in this kind of drilling machine like that mole in the Thunderbird series. He defeats it. Then you go back to a paragraph and it looks like you've got to fight the earth elemental all over again. It doesn't really work. So the gameplay is a bit dodgy, but it's a well-written adventure. It's fun. This is the first of a new format. In the back, it gives you different adventurers you can play. You can play Gorin Silverblade, Aldar Ravenwolf, and Arian Stormchild. Though it seems to me to make no difference to the gameplay whatsoever. So I don't really understand the point of that. But, you know, overall, I think quite an enjoyable adventure. Then, again influenced by Creature of Havoc, comes Jonathan Green's next Night of the Necromancer. Great title. In this one, you become a ghost. It was bound to happen. And you're a member of the undead, and you're fighting creatures of the undead. This one is more gothic horror, and it's clearly based on Hamlet. It even takes place in Valsinor Castle. And I think one of the characters is based on Ophelia, Oriana, yeah. So it's kind of more gothic-y, more Shakespearean. It gets a bit wearing after a while. Again, the writing and all the references that Jonathan Green puts in is more fun than the gameplay, which I think gets on your nerves after a while. But it's a nice addition to the Fighting Fantasy Gamebook series. Now, on the 30th anniversary, Ian Livingstone came back and he wrote Blood of the Zombies. I'm not going to spend much time on this one because, frankly, it's crap. I don't know what was going through Ian Livingstone's brain when he did this one. It's really poor. I think one of the worst in the entire series. Look, I like zombie movies. I love George Romero. I love 28 Days Later, and this is clearly indebted to that. But the problem with it is, the good thing about most fighting fantasy books is the variety of enemies, right? And the variety of situations. Well, in this one, it's a zombie. Then you go down the corridor, there's another zombie. Do you want to go in the left-hand door or the right-hand door? You go in the left-hand door, it's a zombie. You go in the right-hand door, it's a zombie. It's boring, you know. And the setting is so weird. You go to Romania and there's a bunch of they're like a mafia-type small army. And then there's loads of zombies. It's just weird. It doesn't work as a game book. I'm all for originality and doing different things and getting away from Valencia. But this one just doesn't work. It's very poor. Ian Livingstone came back with The Port of Peril. This is a much more conventional adventure, and it's something of a love letter to the whole series, really. You go back to, there's Nicodemus is in it, Zanbar Bones in it, Yaztramo's in it. It's a nice, jolly adventure. This is in the Scholastic one, and they changed the format of it with the I can't stand the illustrations. They just bleed all the atmosphere out. It's a bit of a shame, really. I think Scholastic aimed it much more at a younger children's market. Yes, I know they were always children's books, but, us adults and teenagers could enjoy them because they were full of, zombies and flesh-eating wasps and all that sort of stuff. With this one, they tried to aim it at a lower age group. It's quite a jolly, enjoyable adventure. I like the way it morphs from being a treasure hunt to being fighting against some evil, warlock. Not a particularly memorable adventure, but quite good fun to play. Charlie Higson, you know that name, right? He was one of the creators of the Fast Show, um, and he's also a children's writer, and you can tell in the way he writes this. He writes it in a very jocular, light-hearted tone, which some people might like, some people might dislike. It depends on your taste. Um, it's quite a jolly adventure. I think again, Higson is far more of a writer than he is a game constructor. The gameplay in this adventure, you're too channeled into what you have to do. If you deviate slightly, it doesn't work, and I don't really like that very much. Um, it's nicely written. I like the idea of the invisible city, and you have to get on a particular rock with a particular piece of equipment to see the city. But yeah, it's nicely written. It's quite good fun. It's quite light-hearted, but I don't think it's a very good game, and perhaps that's why it's not particularly popular. More Ian Livingstone now. Assassins of Valencia. I quite like this one. At the start of the book, you take a wager to go and live on this island for a month. And then while you're on this island for a month, in Port Blacksand, Lord Azure, who appears in all of these last three books, he puts a price on your head, so these assassins start to come to kill you. And I like the variety of assassins that are trying to kill you. It's pretty basic stuff. It's enjoyable. It's well put together. Um, yeah, nice variety of people who are trying to kill you, which is always good, isn't it? Not one of the best adventures, but I think that's sort of standard Ian Livingstone fare. The next one is a bit unusual. Crystal of Storms, terrible title and a terrible cover as well. They're really going for the children's market now by Rhianna Pratchett. This one is very self-consciously aimed at children. It doesn't have the sort of edge, the nasty edge of some of the previous Fighting Fantasy game books, which I like. It's very much aimed at kids, and if you look at the illustrations, there's sort of something childish about it. If I can find what I just saw that, you know, it's kind of more sweet than frightening. And it takes us into the world of Studio Ghibli. There's Hayao Miyazaki films like Castle in the Sky and Spirited Away and books like that with these floating islands. And you're a sort of cadet on these floating islands. It's quite sweet. I like the attempt to do something different, to take the game book into a different environment. But this is more, if you wanted to introduce your young children to fighting fantasy, this is a book I would recommend. But for those dyed-in-the-wool fans like me, it's probably leaves you a bit wanting more. Now, for the 40th anniversary, Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson were invited back, and they both did a brand new adventure. And they stepped up to the 40th anniversary challenge, I think, and produced two really good ones. Ian Livingstone came back with Shadow of the Giants, where he returned to his happy place, Port Blacksand and adventurers in Valencia. But what I like about this one, actually, is you go off on this sort of treasure hunt back to Firetop Mountain, and you think that that's what it's going to be about, but actually what happens is you displace some crown, you actually put it on your friend's head, and he's killed, and then these four giants, or is it five giants, I can't remember, sort of spring out of the crown that he puts on his head, and then go on a rampage around the countryside, and you've got to stop them. So it's quite an amusing idea. There's lots of good incident in it. It's well put together. They've brought back better illustrations for the 40th anniversary. These illustrations in this one are done by... Oh, I can't even see now. Well, anyway, they're very good anyway. And I enjoyed this one very much. It was Livingstone getting back to form, I think. But even better, Steve Jackson came back. Yes, Sorcery Steve Jackson, working with Jonathan Green. Secrets of Salamonis. And immediately, Steve Jackson's originality and wit comes back into the series. And what he does is, he almost makes a social realist fighting fantasy books, like a Ken Loach movie for fighting fantasy fans. So what he does is, you turn up. Well, you start the adventure in a dream, which is quite original, and you wake up on this boat. You're absolutely penniless, and you come into this city. And so the idea of this book is that adventuring is a job. You've got to earn money. You've got to learn how to survive in this city. You have to get a job and you have to earn some cash. Then you have to go and train. And then you have to go and choose which adventure you want to undertake now as your job. And then how you undertake those jobs and in what order reflects on how you get through the book. It does mean that it takes a long while for the adventure to get going, and some people might be a bit impatient with that. But I really enjoyed the originality of the setup. I thought it was quite witty and quite clever. And again, I felt that Steve Jackson created a kind of adventure that is more free. You're not just set on a path where you've got to get this, get this, get this, go there, get this, meet this person, like in the Livingston books. There's a sort of sense of freedom that the book can go anywhere at any time, and you can sort of exist within it. And I really like that about this book. It may not be everyone's cup of tea. Some people might prefer the more wild fantasy of some of the other books. But I quite enjoyed this kind of social realist workaday vision of being an adventurer. So there you go. I think in the final analysis, I think some of these later books are good. They are worthy of the original series, and they're worth seeking out. Secrets of Salamonis is terrific. I really like that. Howl of the Werewolf, Jonathan Green, really highly recommended. Let me know your thoughts on these books, whether you think they were as good as the original series. Is there any that I've underrated or overrated? Let me know. And if you like my content, please like and subscribe.